Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Tejas Chopra, and today I'll be talking about compacting small objects in cloud. I am a senior software engineer at Netflix. So the agenda for this talk is as follows. There'll be a brief introduction about myself, what I do. We'll go over the problem statement and overview. Then we'll get into some basics of compaction. We'll discuss some data structures such as blobs and blob descriptor tables that were used to compact and how different file system operations such as reads, deletes, and writes had to change. Finally, we'll go over some handling of fault tolerance and conclusion and takeaways. I'm a senior software engineer at Netflix. I work on creating infrastructure solutions, microservices that can help deal with exabyte scale data that is generated by Netflix studios and streaming platforms. So specifically, I work on architecting the backend stack to support globally distributed artists to collaborate on shared assets. I'm also an international keynote speaker. I talk on distributed systems, cloud, and blockchain. Prior to Netflix, I was a senior software engineer at Box, where again, I was architecting infrastructure solutions for petabytes of data and millions of customers. My experience has been in companies such as Datrium, Samsung, Cadence, and Apple, and has mostly been on cloud, distributed systems, and file systems. Uh, when when we're looking at the environment today, a lot of companies are trying to move to the cloud. The cloud footprint has actually exponentially grown over a period of so many years. And now we have around 45 zettabytes of data that is stored across cloud and on-premise systems. Um, a lot of the applications that we work with today work at file and folder interface, but the cloud is an object store. So there must be a layer of translation that translates the files and folders into objects in the cloud. And if you can imagine, a simple cloud file system would be mapping each individual file to an object. Uh, and that is what most of the cloud file systems try to do. However, the nature of cloud workloads is very interesting. The applications that work on cloud generate a lot of small files and they are created in bursts. Um, Now, small sized files are not beneficial for cloud storage. This is akin to your local file systems where small random writes are not very favorable for your file system. And the idea of this presentation is just like we change the small random writes into big sequential writes, we will try to pack these small files into larger objects that can be stored on cloud. And the reason that small sized files are not beneficial is because one, there are request level costs for putting data into the cloud and for egressing data out of the cloud. For example, a gigabyte file with 4 kilobyte puts is 57 times the cost of actually storing the file. And this is the cost of puts that I'm talking about. Um, the other reason is throttling. So AWS guidelines say that if an application is performing more than 300 put, delete, or list requests per second or 800 get requests per second, then S3 may rate limit the request. So throttling is sometimes so aggressive that a 4 megabyte put is 1000 times faster than 1004 kilobyte puts. This graph here is showing the average throughput with the object size. So as you see, once we increase the object size, we see that the average throughput has been increasing. Now, this is the motivation of trying to club these different small files together into large objects. And there are other alternatives to S3 as well. Like the idea is for files and folders to be mapped to cloud, and we would see if we can use databases or elastic file systems that are available on cloud. So EFS is a generic file system, and it only charges for storage, but it doesn't charge for any requests. And the storage cost is $0.3 per gigabyte per month. DynamoDB is another alternative. It is a NoSQL database for kilobyte sized objects. Its cost is both storage and request cost. And the storage cost is $0.25 per gigabyte per month. And it's $0.47 for one write per second per month and $0.09 for one read per second per month. S3 has very low storage cost, which is 0.023 per gigabyte per month. But it has a cost per put, as we discussed. It is 0.0005 cents per put. So now, just to put things in perspective, if you have to store a terabyte worth of 4 kilobyte files, each with 100 writes per second, then if you use S3 as is, it'll be $1,366 per month. The interesting part to note is that the operation cost, which is the cost of putting the data, is 98% of the overall cost. And it will take 5 years of storage to match the operation cost. In an ideal world, we would want the operation cost to be minimum, and it should take very little amount of storage to match the operation cost. For Elastic File Systems, it's $307 because there is no operation cost. For DynamoDB, it's $303 for the month, and the operation cost is 16%. It'll take 5 days of storage to match the operation cost. With packing enabled and with compaction techniques that we'll discuss, S3 can be brought down to $24, and the operation cost will be 0.001% of the overall cost. It'll only take 27 seconds of storage to match the operation cost. This is what we are able to accomplish with compaction techniques. What exactly is compaction? Compaction is a pluggable client-side packing and indexing module. So it packs these small files into gigabyte-sized blobs. And we also need to maintain an index of where the file is within a blob. And that index is maintained in two places. That is maintained as a footer inside a blob as well. And it is also maintained in a global global database of some sorts, which I call the blob descriptor table. And the embedded index in every blob is for fault tolerance. And we'll get into how that helps with recovery situations. So there are two important data structures that we have in our system. One is a blob, and the second one is a blob descriptor table. A blob is a single immutable object on cloud. It is generally of the size of gigabytes. Data from multiple files gets packed into a blob. Blob will also contain a footer, which contains information about the byte ranges of the file within a blob. So in a sense, by reading all the footers of all the packed blobs, you can actually get all the application files. We could have used SS tables, but it requires sorting of key value pairs before persisting. The second data structure is a blob descriptor table. It is an optimization over reading all the blob footers to create the world. It is a global table, global database that contains information of all the files in all the blobs. It is actually redundant in nature because it can be recreated. The consistency of a blob descriptor table is a challenge because blob creation is distributed. We'll get into how having a combination of both a global table and a local footer in a blob can have situations where your blob descriptor table may just not be checkpointed or auto-synced, and then you can just recreate the world using the remaining blobs. So what exactly is packing and pushing? So for packing, you need to have sufficient data to be accumulated before it is pushed to cloud. Data is buffered on different nodes, and it is until it is persisted in cloud, it is not considered durable. So this is a side effect of our packing and pushing. Most of the machines or the clients that we are talking about, which buffer the node, they are generally not ephemeral in nature because they are generally systems on which users work. So we can assume that they will still not be as bad as EC2 machines that are ephemeral. The packing policy is specified at mount time. So how do you want to pack different files, which files to pick to pack inside a given blob? All of that is can be defined by several policies, and they can be specified at the time of mounting. So once the data is packed, after that point, the embedded indices within the blob get updated. The blob name on cloud, we had to be very careful choosing the right name for the blob because this name needs to contain information about the blob. So we chose the name in the form of a client IP, a footer offset, and a date. Client IP tells us which machine was packing the blob. Footer offset tells us where inside the blob can we start reading the footer directly. So that will help during parsing when the system comes up. And the date tells us the date at which the blob was written. So for a given client, if the similar kind of a blob is created with the same footer, then date will help break and give us information more about the specific blob. The blob descriptor table, once the blob is pushed, gets updated with new extents for a given file. One thing to note is that the global table will always maintain an updated location for a file. For files that have not yet been pushed to cloud and they are still lying buffered on the client, it will contain the client IP. For the files that have been pushed to cloud, it will contain the object ID that we've discussed here and the file's extent in the blob. This information is sufficient to get the information of the file from cloud. So now we have to change some operations to handle this new way of storing data. For example, reads had to change because any read request that is coming to a file needs to now check whether the data is buffered on a client or it has been pushed to cloud. And like I said, the blob descriptor table or our global database contains the location of the file. If it is on a client node, it will point to the client node. And the client to client forwarding of a read will occur. So you can read the bits from one client's cache or memory into the other client. If it is already pushed on the cloud, then you have two options. One is that a lot of cloud providers now provide range read requests, which means that given an object, you can read a part of the object. So one way could be to reach out to the blob descriptor table, figure out the extent of the file inside the object on cloud, and then issue a range read request for that particular part inside the object in cloud. And this is critical because you do not need to fetch the entire blob. But there are some applications where it may be in fact beneficial to fetch the entire blob, and that is the whole concept of spatial locality. Because if there is a read request for a file, and if you've packed similar kind of files together in a blob, then there is a high probability that the subsequent read request would be for files that are around that file in the blob. So you can actually fetch more than just what is requested, and it will reduce the read latencies for future fetch content. The writes stay the same because writes actually go to the file and the files will then be updated on the client. We need to handle deletes and renames separately. So if you look at delete, let's say that the application wants to delete a file. If the file is stored on the client and not yet packed and pushed, then it's fine. You can just remove the file from the client and update the descriptor table to remove the entry. But if the file has been packed and pushed to cloud, then in that case, what you want to do is first remove the file from the global table to prevent further requests to the file. Also, what we want to do is periodically check the liveness of a blob. So we have daemons that check for every blob and all the files that are present in the blob if they are present in the blob descriptor table as well. For files that are not present in the table, we can either place a tombstone there or we can delete the table, the files from the table. We will actually mark the liveness of a blob appropriately. Periodically, we will also check for all the blobs that have their liveness ratio below a threshold. And then we will repack these blobs into a single blob, update the table with the latest information. So that is how deletes can be handled. The second is renames. So when you rename a file, you want the reflected the new name to show up immediately. So for that, we need to have an atomic update of the file's name in the blob descriptor table. Once the file has been updated in the table, we will actually piggyback on future blobs embedded indices to place this information of a rename inside that. And you can think that in recovery scenarios, when we are reading the blobs, blobs are read in the order of creation, and that information is stored in the object ID itself. So the latest blobs will always contain the rename information for any file that was renamed in any blob. So that's how renames can be handled in our system. Now let's get into fault tolerance. So master is one node that is actually periodically backing the global database to cloud. And what happens if the master dies? So on a crash, what we will do is we will read the last checkpointed table from cloud, and then all the blobs that were written after that time. So because we store the date in the object ID, we can easily place filters on S3 or other object stores to read only the blobs that were written after that point in time. And then after reading those blobs, we can then first have the checkpointed table and then apply the footers of these new blobs on the table. So that will give the most updated table to us. And then we can, before starting up, we'll checkpoint it again so that we always reflect the current state of the table. The second option is, what if the client dies? The client that is buffering the files will actually lose the files that are buffered for packing. And the files can still be recovered if it is persisted on local disk, which is mostly the case. But there is no guarantee made for recovering these files. If the files are packed and pushed, then the BDT contains all the information required for recovery. If the files were packed and pushed and the BDT was not updated, then the embedded indices contain information for recovery. And this is present in the footers. And that's why we needed both the global table and the footer inside a blob. Now coming to results of applying this. So when we use this technique, we saw that for a when we were writing 24.4 gigabytes worth of 8 kilobyte files to Amazon S3, our price actually went down by 25,000x for packed S3 bucket object stores. And the throughput actually increased by 60 times. So this is what we were able to achieve by a simple simulation of this packing and indexing. In conclusion, I would say that cloud file systems should aggressively pack files into cloud objects. And the reason that cloud object stores are not very good at dealing with small files is because they have significant per operation cost, and there are throttling limits for how many operations can be performed in a second. By using packing and indexing, we can improve the throughput by 60 times and cost can be reduced by 25,000 times. Um, One way to think of a good application of this is backups of smaller files. So smaller file backups can be archived using this strategy to improve both the backup times and costs. And also, generally, the backups would be fetched in its entirety. So you can actually read the entire blob while you're fetching for the particular object in cloud. I discussed briefly about packing policies that can pack objects specified at mount time. Now, there are different ways of choosing how to pack these different files together. Files that belong to a single application can be packed together. Files that are created around the same time can be packed together. In general, files that have the same life cycle need to be packed together. And there we could also apply machine learning to choose files that can be packed together. And objects that have similar read profiles can benefit from prefetching the entire blob together. That's my time. Thank you so much for joining me here. And now please feel free to ask me any questions. Any questions, anyone? I hope it was it was a small presentation, but I hope that I was able to convey the idea of packing and indexing. Cool. I think we are good then. We all get some time back in our lives. And thank you so much for joining me today. And I appreciate you listening in. And thank you for spending time with me here.